Boom. 2022 budget report. All right. First, starting off with the 21 performance overview versus budget. At fiscal year 21 was 103% of budgeted congregational giving, which was about plus 20 grand in net income for 21. Sorry, that says FY20. And then 91% of the budgeted expenses were realized in FY21. So here, graphical depiction of that, 7% growth from 20 to 21 that, in actual income. And then we had actual decline of 2% from 20 to 21 for expenses. So just want to put those right next to each other, just over the last 3 years. So year over year, fiscal 21 plus 7% for congregational giving and then budgeted for a 2% growth here as well, but we grew by 7. That was the big thing for, in regards to the COVID year. I don't know if y'all were on it last year, but the big thing was when we started and made the budget for 2021, we had the goal of reviewing it on a quarterly basis just to see what would happen in response. And each month and each quarter, we would, Val would get together the whole report, and we were always within, 1% or 2% of budget and or over it. So it was, so we never had to reevaluate the budget really because we were right on target. We grew as if it were essentially another year, and it was great. It was encouraging, and we saw some good growth there in income. And then the expenses obviously went down because we were meeting less, and less events and less other big things that we had budgeted for pre-COVID. So so we saw that happening, and that was a expected decline. Then, all right, the fiscal year 22 budget summary. We projected a 5% income growth for 22 versus the 21. So that was actual. So I guess this is something to kind of describe. So actual for 21, we were up to 696, and then budgeted for 22, we were up to 699. So that's like less than 1% of growth, but that's based off of actual. So really, we have already realized we're looking for a small growth in the actual revenue there when we projected really a 5% growth off the budget. Does that make sense? I know that we're being relatively conservative this year, based off of maybe backlash from COVID, but also just to be conservative moving forward here. And then the net income is about 43,000 for 22. We have a couple of we're budgeting in a larger net income than we usually have. The surplus is usually a little bit negative or just barely within $1,000 or a few $1,000s of the budget. But this year, one of the big things was Jim's position turned into an hourly position, obviously with oh gosh, I forgot the first name, Lion. Yeah. So then that was a like 40 grand or so decrease. So we saw that, and that's essentially what this net income is. And then we also assume that as we move forward, we're looking for buildings. This is talking a little bit above that, but there's a possibility of building in the future. So if we don't use this, then it'll go into that or investment account and have that same purpose there moving forward with the rest of our cash. And then fiscal year 22, our budget expenses are actually down mainly because of that, mainly because of the staffing decrease. We're still doing the 21% allotting to supporting missions. Bentley also actually even increased 5% increase for all part-time, and then a larger increase as well for hourly staff as well. And then kept up with the CPI for any salaried. So Harrison and Eric, you know, that was 4.1 this year. So they had a 4% growth as well in their salaries. All right, and then you know, for our expense breakdown, I think the main thing there is we kept our priorities the same when we were building this. We didn't change much there, and our you know, our priorities kind of stayed as they are listed here, the 1 through 6 in order. You know, we had staffing and benefits, church life, missions giving, church life events, CD/invested funds, and then cash. So those CD/invested funds, we moved those over into an account, all, you know, out of a CD into a responsibly managed brokerage account that is actually in the market now. So I know for the last year during COVID, or pre-COVID, I guess, we had a pretty good CD rate of, I can't recall what it was, Frank, but it was a couple of percent. So it was actually a good. And then while we were trying to decide what to do with the building expense and getting that ready for that in case that was going to happen, but we decided to move it over into a large, you know, and actually invested in the market. So it actually worked out perfectly, because when it was in the CD, it was during COVID, a lot of dips in the market, and then now, you know, we kind of put it in as everything was rising back up. So so it's looking good. I can follow up with any sort of summary on the investment account, but I didn't include that here. Some big things, yeah. So the priorities here are reflected in the pie graph. We had 58% of our expenses are in staff, 22 in missions, and 9 in facilities, and then the missions giving as well on that as you go around the circle. Great. And then the year-over-year changes, we had 1% decrease projected, or 2% decrease projected in expenses. Forgot to update that piece. 45% of savings from the children's ministry position, 5%, you know, I went through that. New line, we also added a new line item for guest preachers. And then women's ministry increased based off of historical growth. Meg's you know, the different programs and everything that she's been doing over the last year have grown pretty significantly. So we've continued to add more events, and so we increased your budget as well. So that's great to see, and excited to see. And then new line for guest preachers. I think and maybe Harrison could talk to this, but they were looking at adding, you know, we pay for guest preachers, and whether or not anybody knew that, but we increased that to have a little bit more of a couple more guest preachers over the year. The next slide, missions giving partners for 22. So we had a couple of additions here. We had, trying to figure out, we had Jessica Forbes here, City to City in Europe, InterVarsity, VCU, and then One Voice Fellowship as well. So we have them in different categories here. This is just around what we're giving to each of these partners. The 5,000, you know, down to less than 5,000 a year for these other partners. Great. Any questions on these new ones? I know, Val, you sent over a lot of these new ones that we added. Some of them I hadn't heard of, but sounds great. And so we're continuing to add new missions partners each year, trying to keep up with that 21% goal that we have for all income that comes into City Church, and the main outgoing sponsorship are to these missions partners. So.
Yeah, I mean, there are occasional one-off events that we also contribute to out of that, like the Young Life Golf Tournament and Night to Shine. Some of that didn't happen last year, but yeah, these are our regular maintained commitments. And most of these will continue into this next fiscal year, but I believe the missions team is meeting next week to talk about what that will look like.
Okay, great.
What's One Voice? I'm just curious. That's the only one I didn't recognize.
Eric, can you speak to that? Because I'm not super familiar with that one. I just write the check.
I'm not sure. Is Eric Bonkowski on?
Eric Bonkowski.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize he was on.
He snuck in.
He's trolling in the comments.
I was like, you're asking me. I don't know. Just ask you now.
One Voice Fellowship is a church plant up in Northern Virginia. It's a PCA church plant pastored by a guy named Chris Six. And it is kind of international. For instance, they print their worship guide in, I think, 8 different languages because of the community they're in. And that's a big part of their mission as a church. So the missions team and missions giving team found it compelling to support a church plant that was particularly focused on kind of being a church of the nations.
Then the last slide is just a summary, the actual detailed numbers for 22, and then the last couple of years as well. That's what I have for the budget presentation for fiscal year 22. Are there any other questions or any questions?
What happens with any surpluses? Is that a case-by-case basis, or is there a standard way we allocate that?
So we have a holding tank for we have first our just cash reserves for all pieces that we like to keep at about 80 to 100,000 for expenses and staffing and salaries and all that piece, and then the rest we have so far put into, and we just reallocated it. So the rest we've put into an investment account, into a conservative, managed account and then with Mike's firm, and then the cash we as if we have further surpluses moving forward, we decide to either put them in an investment account or that's pretty much what I've done with most of them so far. The rest is pretty much sitting in cash.
Yeah, and those funds have not yet been moved to the investment account. I believe Mike is still setting it up, but we are in the process of getting that. Yeah. But that we will keep that 100-ish thousand reserve in the checking account and move the rest to investment.
Yeah.
David, we should also add that for some of the surplus from this fiscal year that just ended, we are exploring the possibility of doing some renovations on the 3rd floor to make the space more usable. And our plan would be to use some of the surplus from 21 for that purpose.
I'll just add, if anyone's curious, the fund that we've selected is called the Calvert. That's the company that manages it. Calvert Responsible Conservative Model Strategy. So it's a ESG fund that's 65% fixed income and 35% equities. And I think about maybe 10% of that equity portion is international. The rest is domestic, but it's very, very, very conservative fund that should, it's not going to have huge returns, but if the market has any corrections, we will be, especially the equities markets have corrections, will be protected by 65% being in fixed income.
So have we seen a drop in congregational giving? I mean, obviously it doesn't really look like it, but I just was, one of the questions that I know Harrison and I've talked about this of like, who is actually a member of City Church anymore? Because we did have, I think, some bleeding. So I was just curious if we've seen any drop, or, I mean, obviously it went up, but like in number of households, did we see a drop, or did the number of households giving increase or stay steady?
I can't tell you the definite number, but I do know that we had people come on as contributors during the pandemic who were not contributing before. We did have had a couple people drop off because they've moved or moved on, but it stayed stable.
Well, Eric, you did such a good job in church today that no one showed up. So
It's not no one.
Hey,
Here.
I shamed Harrison was the one that admitted that he was shamed and came in. So I got one.